For decades, the story of World War II was told through grand strategies, epic battles, and technological marvels. But deep within the archives of that global conflict, hidden in plain sight, lies a tale of a secret weapon unlike any other. A weapon forged not from steel or gunpowder, but from the intricate threads of human language. A living code so complex, so ancient, that it defied the most brilliant minds of the Japanese Empire. This is the story of the Navajo Code Talkers, and the unbreakable secret they carried. Imagine yourself in the heart of Japanese naval intelligence on March 15, 1944. Commander Atsuzo Kurihara, a man whose reputation for breaking Allied codes was legendary, stared at another intercepted transmission. His third cup of tea, bitter and forgotten, sat cold on his desk. For 18 grueling hours, his team of Japan's finest crypt-analysts had been trying to decipher what appeared to be American Marine Corps tactical communications. They were operating out of the Oda Communications Unit, a facility just 20 miles from Tokyo, employing 500 personnel, equipped with state-of-the-art radio receivers and direction finders. This wasn't some backwater operation. This was the cutting edge of wartime intelligence. These weren't random sounds. The patterns suggested highly structured military communication, timing that consistently preceded American attacks, durations that matched operational orders, frequency usage perfectly aligned with Marine Corps protocols. Yet, the language itself, a cascade of sounds like Besetti da Descartes, remained absolutely impenetrable. It was unlike anything in their extensive files on Allied communication systems. Kurihara's team had already cracked American diplomatic traffic, including the notorious Purple Code before Pearl Harbor, giving Japan a crucial advantage in the early years of the war. They had penetrated British naval communications and numerous Army codes. But these Marine transmissions, they represented a complete and utter cryptographic failure. 3 years into the most devastating war in human history, after breaking dozens of Allied codes, Japan's best minds couldn't decipher even the most basic patterns in these mysterious messages. What Commander Kurihara didn't know, what no Japanese intelligence officer would comprehend until after the war, was that he was listening to the only unbroken code in modern military history. It was a secret born not in the high-tech laboratories of cryptography, but in the sun-drenched canyons and wind-swept plateaus of the American Southwest. The story of this linguistic fortress begins with the Diné, the Navajo people, who for centuries had preserved a language unlike any other on Earth. Diné Bizaad, the Navajo language, is a member of the Athabascan language family, spoken by approximately 170,000 people in 1940. These speakers were almost entirely confined to the vast 27,000 square mile reservation spanning Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. It was a language geographically isolated, culturally preserved, and linguistically unique, a perfect storm for an unbreakable code. The very characteristics that would confound Japanese code breakers had evolved over millennia. Navajo is fundamentally verb-centered, with actions described through incredibly complex prefix combinations that can number in the millions. Imagine trying to learn a language where a single verb might have hundreds of thousands, or even millions, of possible inflections, depending on who is doing what, to whom, with what, where, and when. It's a linguistic tapestry of mind-boggling complexity. Adding another layer of difficulty, the language employs 4 distinct tones: high, low, rising, and falling. A slight mispronunciation doesn't just change a word, it can render an entire sentence incomprehensible. For someone not raised speaking Navajo, these tonal distinctions are incredibly subtle and difficult to discern, let alone reproduce. And then there's the phonology, a symphony of sounds largely absent from Japanese, English, and most other world languages. We're talking about ejective stops, where air explodes from the glottis, a voiceless lateral fricative that sounds like wind whistling through teeth, glottalized sonorants, and nasalized vowels. For Japanese speakers, whose language typically has just 5 distinct vowel sounds, accurately hearing and differentiating these Navajo phonemes was virtually impossible. It was a linguistic landscape built for secrecy, a natural firewall against foreign intrusion. Into this unique linguistic world stepped Philip Johnston. Born in 1892 to Protestant missionaries on the Navajo Reservation, Johnston grew up speaking Navajo fluently. He was one of fewer than 30 non-Navajos worldwide who could make that claim. By age 9, he was translating his father's sermons, acting as a vital bridge between two vastly different cultures. By 15, he had traveled to Washington, D.C. to translate for Navajo leaders, even meeting President Theodore Roosevelt. His understanding of the language was not just academic. It was deeply ingrained, a part of his childhood and formative experiences. In December 1941, as America reeled from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Johnston read about U.S. Army units using Comanche speakers in Louisiana training exercises. He knew the Choctaw had served in World War I, but those efforts were improvised and limited. Johnston envisioned something far more revolutionary, a formal military code based on Navajo that would be both unbreakable and practical for modern warfare. His unique background made him uniquely qualified to see this potential. He understood that the very cultural and linguistic isolation that had often marginalized the Navajo people could now be America's greatest secret weapon. On February 28, 1942, Johnston presented his proposal to Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego. The demonstration was nothing short of remarkable. 4 Navajos from Los Angeles transmitted messages, while Marine officers timed them against standard procedures using a complex M209 cipher machine. The results were astounding. The Navajo speakers completed transmission in 20 seconds, a task that took 30 minutes using the machine. The speed, coupled with the apparent incomprehensibility, immediately convinced General Vogel. He authorized a pilot program. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo recruits were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. These young men, including figures who would later become legends like Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, and John Benally, came from across the reservation. Their backgrounds were diverse. Some had attended boarding schools where speaking Navajo was strictly forbidden and often severely punished, a cruel irony that would soon be inverted into a national advantage. Others were traditional sheep herders who rarely left their ancestral lands, their connection to Diné Bizaad as natural as breathing. At Camp Elliott, these 29 men were sequestered in a locked, guarded building for 8 intense weeks. Their monumental task, to create a military code within their native language. This wasn't merely about translation, it was about inventing new terminology for concepts that simply didn't exist in Navajo, creating an alphabet system, and ensuring that everything was both memorable and expandable. It required a unique blend of linguistic genius and cultural logic. They built the code through metaphor and ingenuity. A submarine became Beshlo, an ironfish swimming beneath the surface. A battleship was Lotso, the whale, the ocean's largest creature. Fighter planes transformed into Da-he-ti-hi, hummingbirds, darting through the air with incredible speed. Bombers were Yesh-cho, buzzards, circling ominously before descending. Each term was logical to a Navajo speaker, yet utterly meaningless to an outsider trying to understand literal translations. The alphabet system required even greater creativity. To prevent frequency analysis, which codebreakers often use to identify common letters, each English letter needed multiple Navajo words. For example, the letter E, one of the most common in English, received 4 alternatives: Zil, elk; Ana, eye-tear; Ha-ear, hair; and Ea, ear. Code talkers would randomly alternate between these options, effectively destroying any discernible patterns. They developed 211 initial terms, memorizing every single one perfectly. There could be no code books, no written guides. The risk of capture was too great. As Chester Nez recalled, "We drilled endlessly. A mistake could cost lives. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly was sacred." The stakes were not just military, they were cultural and spiritual. The code's first true test came at Guadalcanal in August 1942. 15 code talkers landed with the 1st Marine Division. The Japanese, having successfully decoded other Allied communications, expected the invasion. But suddenly, Marine tactical messages became an incomprehensible torrent of sounds. At Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters in Rabaul, intelligence officers scrambled. Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada, educated at Stanford before the war, reported, "The sounds are structured like language, with consistent patterns, but it matches nothing. Not English, French, Dutch, Spanish, any Philippine dialect, any Chinese dialect. Completely alien." The Japanese response was systematic and exhaustive. They assigned top crypt-analysts, recorded hundreds of hours of these mysterious transmissions on wax cylinders, and applied every analytical technique known to them. They consulted university linguists, even Buddhist monks who specialized in ancient languages. But nothing worked. The Navajo Code remained a closed book. The practical impact on the battlefield was immediate and devastating for the Japanese. On November 8, 1942, code talker Chester Nez transmitted artillery coordinates that destroyed a Japanese machine gun nest. The 14-second transmission was intercepted, but it remained meaningless noise to Japanese operators. Within minutes, American shells fell precisely on target. Colonel Haruo Kanuma, intelligence officer for the 17th Army, wrote in frustration, "The Americans have deployed a code that defeats every attempt. We can no longer anticipate attacks. We are fighting blind." Japan's best hope for breaking the code emerged in the form of Joe Kailumia, a Navajo soldier captured at Bataan in April 1942, before the Code Talker program was even conceived. Though fluent in Navajo, Kailumia had no knowledge of the specific military code being developed at Camp Elliott. When Japanese cryptographers began intercepting Navajo transmissions, they brought Kailumia to the Auna Interrogation Center. They played him recordings of the code talkers. Kailumia heard Navajo words, but in utterly meaningless combinations. The turtle is attacking the iron fish. The hummingbird carries eggs. When he couldn't translate these nonsensical phrases into coherent military intelligence, His interrogators accused him of lying. The torture escalated systematically over months. Water torture, brutal beatings, being hung by his arms for hours. In the bitter winter of 1943, they forced him to stand naked in the snow until his feet froze to the ground. They starved him, offering food only in exchange for translations. Through every unimaginable torment, Kailumia could only repeat the truth. He understood the words, but not their military meaning. A Japanese intelligence report from May 1943 documented their increasing frustration. The prisoner appears native to the mystery language but cannot comprehend messages. Assessment: either extraordinary resistance or enemy uses specialized code within native language requiring specific training. The second assessment was correct. Even a fluent Navajo speaker couldn't understand the military code without the specific training the code talkers received. Kailumia survived 3.5 years of captivity. His inability to help the convincing Japanese intelligence they faced something truly unprecedented. By late 1943, they largely abandoned attempts to decode Navajo transmissions. The human cost of their incomprehension was immense. The undeniable success at Guadalcanal led to immediate expansion of the program. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, wrote, "The Navajo communicators have proven invaluable. Their transmissions are faster than any encoding device and absolutely secure." A formal code talker school at Camp Pendleton began processing classes every 8 weeks. By war's end, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers across all 6 Marine divisions. Their training was unlike anything else in Marine Corps history. Recruits practiced in soundproof booths while instructors introduced battlefield noises, artillery fire, machine gun rattles, screams, to simulate combat chaos. They transmitted messages wearing gas masks, running through exhaustion, constantly pushed to their physical and mental limits. Thomas H. B. Gay, who enlisted at just 15 years old, described the intensity. "They pushed us beyond what was possible. Lives depended on our accuracy. There was no room for error. The code itself was a living, evolving entity. New technologies, new tactics, and new threats constantly required new vocabulary. The atomic bomb became a yashi, metal egg. Kamikaze pilots were neti, death wind. Each addition was logical to Navajo speakers, a poetic and practical expansion of their existing language, but utterly incomprehensible to outsiders. The code talkers were not just transmitting. They were dynamically expanding their language in real time, under immense pressure. By mid-1943, Japanese intelligence dedicated substantial resources to breaking this code. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 crypt-analysts exclusively to these transmissions. Captain Yoshiro Tanaka tried innovative approaches: musical analysis for tonal patterns, comparison to Native American recordings, consultation with scholars who had studied in America. They even developed special recording equipment to slow transmissions without distorting pitch, and created visual sound representations using oscilloscopes. They applied statistical analysis to sound frequencies and patterns. Lieutenant Commander Masao Yamada later revealed they identified certain patterns, probable call signs, correlations between message length and operational complexity. But without understanding the words, these provided minimal value. It was like understanding the rhythm and structure of a sentence, but having no idea what the words themselves meant. Japanese forces eventually received explicit orders to capture Marine communication personnel alive. recognizing the strategic value of understanding their system. Rewards of 10,000 yen, equivalent to 10 years' salary, were offered for code talker equipment or materials. Several close calls occurred, but no code talker was ever captured with their equipment intact or alive. Their comrades understood the critical importance of preventing their capture. Knowing the code's integrity rested on it. The Central Pacific Campaign vividly demonstrated the code talker's strategic importance. At Tarawa in November 1943, 6 code talkers maintained communications through 76 hours of brutal combat. Lloyd Oliver transmitted continuously for 48 hours, coordinating naval gunfire despite constant shelling. During the Marianas Campaign, 24 code talkers operated around the clock at Saipan. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Furukawa, who had successfully decoded conventional communications to anticipate the invasion, found that once Marines landed, tactical intelligence simply disappeared. Colonel Takashi Saito noted, "Commanders felt abandoned without the intelligence they depended upon." At Peleliu, during a fierce counterattack, code talker Jimmy King transmitted for 6 hours after his partner was killed. Alone, under direct fire, he coordinated artillery from 3 battalions, sending 40 messages without error. His unwavering dedication in the face of death literally turned the tide of that desperate moment. But the battle for Iwo Jima, a brutal, almost unimaginable slugfest, represented the code talker's greatest contribution. Major Howard Connor coordinated the entire initial assault through Navajo Code. 6 code talkers, working in teams, maintained continuous communication throughout the invasion's critical first 48 hours. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, had prepared for 2 years, constructing an underground fortress with 11 miles of tunnels. His defensive plan relied heavily on intercepting American communications to trigger devastating counterattacks. This plan failed completely, thwarted by the linguistic genius of the Navajo. Over those 48 hours, the 6 code talkers sent and received over 800 messages without error. They coordinated 30,000 Marines landing, directed naval gunfire from 100 ships, called in close air support, relayed enemy positions, managed medical evacuations, ordered supplies, and transmitted tactical orders, all while under constant, terrifying fire. Major Connor later testified, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." He emphasized, "During the first 48 hours, I had 6 Navajo radio nets operating around the clock. They sent and received over 800 messages without an error. The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code." Colonel Shigeo Hayashi reported to Kuribayashi that American codes remained unbreakable. Artillery requests, completed in 20 seconds through Navajo, would have taken 30 minutes conventionally. That difference was often the margin between destroying enemy positions and losing American lives. At Okinawa, 35 code talkers coordinated the largest Pacific assault, involving 183,000 troops over 82 brutal days. Japanese forces attempted jamming and voice mimicry, but they couldn't reproduce Navajo's complex tonal qualities. Lieutenant Hiroshi Miyamoto's attempts to mimic Navajo sounded, according to code talker Alfred Newman, like someone gargling while trying to talk. The intricate dance of tones and phonemes, second nature to the Navajo, was an insurmountable barrier for any mimic. On August 14, 1945, code talker Teddy Draper transmitted the war's most significant message. Nehama Edejini Adanil, meaning Japanese surrender. The message went through Navajo channels before conventional ones, a fitting, almost poetic end to the Code Talkers' War. After the war, American interrogators finally discovered the true extent of Japanese efforts and their complete, humbling failure. Lieutenant General Seizo Arisu, Japan's chief of intelligence, admitted, "We never broke the Marine Code. We broke Army codes, Air Force codes, diplomatic traffic, but the Marine Tactical Code was completely secure." Captain Yasuji Kawamoto was even more specific. "We recorded thousands of transmissions. Our best linguists studied them for 3 years. Nothing worked. It was our greatest crypt-analytic failure." In 1944, Japanese analysts had noted tonal patterns suggesting indigenous American languages, and even requested German assistance. But wartime difficulties and German ignorance of such languages prevented any breakthrough. Colonel Masao Yamada admitted, "Inability to read Marine communications cost thousands of lives." Every Marine operation after 1942 was a mystery until it began. Major Hiroshi Tanaka, who survived Iwo Jima, described the profound psychological impact. "We couldn't understand their words. It made us feel primitive, defeated before battle began." It was a defeat not just of tactics, but of morale. But the war's end didn't end the Code Talkers' burden. The program remained classified for potential Cold War use, a national secret held for 2 more decades. These heroes returned home, unable to discuss their service, their valor shrouded in silence. They returned to states where they were still denied voting rights until 1948 in New Mexico and Arizona, and 1957 in Utah. Hotels and restaurants refused them service, a heartbreaking testament to the systemic racism that persisted even after they had saved the nation. They were warriors who helped win the war, but couldn't reveal their heroism. Chester Nez, the last of the original 29, who died in 2014, wrote, "We were warriors who helped win the war, but they couldn't tell anyone. The burden was heavy." Many Code Talkers found healing through traditional ceremonies. The Enemy Way ceremony, for instance, was crucial in purifying warriors from warfare's spiritual contamination. Dan Aki, a Code Talker, explained, "We had used our language to direct death. We needed it for healing." The ceremonies reminded them that their language, the very instrument of war, was fundamentally sacred, a source of life and balance. It was a profound journey from battlefields to traditional healing, all mediated by their mother tongue. In 1968, the program was finally declassified. The first public recognition came in 1969 at a 4th Marine Division reunion. President Reagan declared August 14, 1982, as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. But the most significant recognition came on July 26, 2001, when President George W. Bush presented congressional gold medals to the original 29 Code Talkers in the Capitol Rotunda. Only 5 of the original 29 survived to attend. President Bush declared, "Today, we honor 29 Native Americans who gave their country a service only they could give." Chester Nez, ever humble, responded, "We were ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war. While the Navajos are the most famous, 14 other tribes also provided Code Talkers. The Choctaw pioneered the concept in World War I. In World War II, 17 Comanche Code Talkers served in Europe, landing at D-Day. Hopi, Cherokee, Lakota, and others contributed their languages, each providing a unique linguistic shield. The 2008 Code Talkers Recognition Act acknowledged the contributions of all these tribes. As John Brown, Jr. of the Seminole Nation observed, "They told us our language was no good. Then they needed it to win the war." The irony, the profound injustice, yet also the ultimate vindication was stark. The code demonstrated the incredible sophistication of Native American languages. Code talkers modernized Navajo in real time, creating new grammatical constructions and adapting metaphors for military purposes. Its agglutinative nature, allowing complex ideas to be expressed in single words, meant that what required paragraphs in English could become brief Navajo phrases. Dr. William Morgan, a linguist who worked extensively with Navajo, noted, "They proved indigenous languages aren't primitive. They showed Navajo could express anything, from ceremonies to warfare." The Navajo Code introduced cultural encryption, security through linguistic barriers that no mathematical algorithm could overcome. This influenced post-war intelligence operations, showing that human ingenuity and cultural depth could exceed purely mechanical or mathematical encryption. The concept remains relevant today as quantum computing threatens traditional cryptographic methods. Colonel David Hatch, a former NSA historian, evaluated their achievement. They achieved something unique, a code never broken, never compromised. It proved human linguistic capability could exceed mechanical encryption. In the 1980s, Japanese scholarship began to openly examine their failure. Professor Teo Yoshikawa revealed that 30 crypt-analysts worked exclusively on these transmissions for 2 years, consulting multiple universities. Captain Minoru Yamada revealed, "We knew it was Native American by late 1943, but couldn't identify which language." Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Fukumoto admitted, "Using a native language was so simple, so elegant, we never considered it. It was a blind spot born of a certain kind of cultural and technological hubris. A failure to imagine that the answer lay not in advanced machinery, but in ancient wisdom." In the 1990s, photographer Kenji Kawano documented Code Talker survivors, creating exhibitions in Tokyo and Hiroshima that introduced Japanese audiences to the story. Code Talker Albert Smith told Japanese audiences, "We were both warriors. My language helped defeat you, but now helps us understand each other." It was a powerful message of reconciliation, forged in the ashes of conflict and mutual respect for a shared warrior spirit. In 2010, the Japanese Association of Intelligence Studies Symposium featured Admiral Hiroaki Arai, who declared, "The Navajo Code represents perfect encryption. We had Asia's best code breakers, yet were completely defeated." Chester Nez, the last of the original 29, passed away on June 4, 2014. Today, only 2 code talkers from the approximately 400 who served survive: Thomas H. Begay and Peter MacDonald, neither from the original 29, but crucial to the code's operational success. Peter MacDonald, still speaking at age 96, continues to share a vital message. "We showed America's strength comes from diversity. Our different languages and cultures make us stronger. The Navajo language, once suppressed and even punished, is now recognized as strategically important." Federal funding references the Code Talker story, and young Native Americans study ancestral languages with renewed pride. Dr. Jennifer Dennedale, A Navajo scholar observed, "Code talkers transformed how Native Americans see themselves and how America sees Native Americans. They proved our languages aren't museum pieces, but living resources. They are not remnants of the past, but vital components of the present and future." The Navajo Code Talkers achieved military history's most remarkable feat, creating an unbreakable code that defied Japanese intelligence throughout World War II. Between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines served, transmitting tens of thousands of messages without error under the most brutal combat conditions imaginable. But the deeper significance lies in what they represented. American Indians, whose languages the government had actively tried to eradicate through boarding schools and assimilation policies, used those very languages to defend that nation. Young men from marginalized communities, often facing discrimination at home, provided capabilities that the most sophisticated allies couldn't match. Japanese failure wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a fundamental blindness. They prepared for American technology and conventional codes, not for American diversity, for languages and cultures they couldn't even begin to access. The empire proclaiming racial superiority was defeated in part by that very diversity. Lieutenant General Arasu's admission that Japan never cracked the code used by the Marines acknowledges the profound challenge of confronting an opponent whose strength came from incomprehensible sources. The Code Talkers embodied an America that Japan's ideology simply couldn't accommodate. They proved that America's greatest strength wasn't just its industrial capacity or military might, but its human diversity. Linguistic variety became a strategic advantage. The Navajo language, which boarding schools tried to eliminate, became key to victory in the Pacific. Today, as the last code talkers pass into history, their legacy endures. The language, once forbidden, is taught with pride in schools across the Navajo Nation. Native American veterans are recognized for serving at the highest per capita rates of any demographic group. The idea that diversity strengthens security is now an accepted doctrine, a profound shift from the assimilationist policies of the past. The voices speaking Navajo across Pacific battlefields carried a transcendent message. America's strength comes from many voices, many peoples, many languages, united in purpose but strengthened by differences. The unbroken code proves that differences aren't weaknesses, but strengths to celebrate, preserve, and deploy for freedom. Japanese intelligence officers who failed understood the magnitude best. Their defeat recognized a truth transcending warfare. Some codes are unbreakable, not through mathematical complexity, but through the infinite complexity of human cultures themselves. The code talkers sent messages Japan never decoded, but their greatest message was universal. Diversity brings strength. Culture brings power. Indigenous knowledge serves modern purposes. Young Navajo men, using their sacred language as a weapon, then an instrument of peace, proved forever that America's greatest encryption is diversity itself, unbreakable because it emerges from the limitless human experience and wisdom. The unbroken code remains unbroken, living in every native child speaking an ancestral language with pride, every recognition that minority contributions strengthen national identity, every understanding that differences make us stronger together. The Code Talkers proved that our differences are indeed strengths to celebrate. They are eternal proof that many voices, peoples, and languages, united yet diverse, create the unbreakable code of freedom itself.